Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much for being here. I want to start our talk with a question about Armenia-EU agreement. Last year, Armenian Foreign Deputy Minister claimed that during the first quarter of this year, 2017, the new agreement will be signed. Can you give us details about negotiations and when we can expect that signing?
It is clear that the negotiations on the new framework agreement have reached the final stage. The efforts on both sides in the recent months have been very strong. This week we will be having here in Yerevan another round of the negotiations. The team from Brussels is coming, which shows that the will to accelerate the process is shared by both sides. When you look at the progress made, it's visible that with the exception of a few open issues, the rest of the agreement is essentially ready. So, of
course, what are the issues?
It would be really improper to talk about these open issues in public. But it is clear that there are some open issues of different sort. They would need the additional effort. Sometimes they would need a political decision. But
from the Armenian side, I guess.
I think it's a process of mutual give and take. Nobody is talking about unilateral concessions because I think that in every negotiations, the compromise requires the right moves on both sides. And this is the case also in the very context of the framework agreement. So I think that on both sides, there is a lot of determination to be constructive, to find acceptable solutions. And probably we will know more about the prospects for finalizing the agreement after the present round of negotiations. But it's clear, and I think that the Deputy Foreign Minister of Armenia was not far from the truth, that we are in the final stage of the negotiations.
So during these first 3 months of 2017, it's possible to have the signing?
Both sides at the very beginning agreed that no deadlines, no dates will be mentioned, but that we will try to introduce good dynamics and to seek the compromise as soon as possible. So I am reluctant to speak about any dates, any time frames, but what I can confirm also based on my personal observations, because I attended the last cooperation committee in Brussels on the 14th of December, where the progress of negotiations has been reviewed, that these are the final moments of the negotiations.
What are the main differences between these new agreements and the association agreement which wasn't signed?
The association agreement was based on another logic. It was the logic of approximation and the logic of preferential trade relations. Both these elements are not applicable to the new agreement. It's still premature to draw a very precise comparison because the negotiations on the framework agreement are still continuing. But definitely the obvious difference is that the trade part will not be based on the logic of preferential treatment. Also in some other economic issues, probably the new agreement will be less ambitious. But what is clear is that the core elements of the association agreement relating to the political issues, the cooperation in the political, security and other fields is there it remained, and it will be reflected in the new framework agreement.
Do you think that new agreement somehow will encourage Armenian government to improve the record on human rights and democracy?
One of the new elements which was reflected in the association agreement, which is preserved in the framework agreement, it is set aside as uncontested by the sides during the negotiations, is the part referring to common values, in particular to the common standards in the field of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So I think that the importance of the new agreement is that it will consolidate in the legal form this common basis of values between Armenia and the European Union. Therefore, we can count that the cooperation on these issues will be enriched, will be strengthened, and hopefully we will be able to observe new elements of progress in Armenia thanks to this agreement.
Mr. Ambassador, you are saying that you are close to signing, but meanwhile, yesterday, a political activist was jailed for 2 years for just putting a New Year tree in one of the main squares. Is it like, we do see it as an obstacle for this process, or do you consider it as just kind of local problem and far from this all negotiations and everything?
I wanted to confirm that the European Union is conducting a very frank dialogue with Armenia on human rights and the rule of law and democracy. We are sharing our very sincere assessment of what we perceive still to be improved in Armenia. One of the issues is the independence of the judiciary. Here I would like to highlight a very, I would say, similar approach to the issues reflected in the statements of the new Prime Minister and the statements of the new government. When you look at the assessment of 100 days of the new government, prepared quite recently, the question of the independence of judiciary is highlighted as one of the areas where deficiencies are visible and where Armenia, by its own analysis, needs to make progress. And I think that's very important. This analysis by the new government of the ailments and shortcomings is an optimistic sign which helps us, the European Union, to devote even more resources and to work even closer with Armenia in order to help Armenia address these shortcomings. So what I want to say is that these issues, the work of the courts, the work of the judges, the application of the human rights standards is in the center of our attention here in Armenia, is in the center of our cooperation and dialogue with Armenia. And I hope very much that we will be able to note new progress. Armenians should know that the factor of common values is very important for our relationship with Armenia.
100 days are not enough to evaluate work of any government, but anyhow, do you see progress or eagerness from our new government to do some democratic changes or especially fight corruption?
We have seen a number of very encouraging signs concerning the declarations and the new legislative and other initiatives on the part of the new government. Some of the issues which, from the perspective of the EU engagement, have been voiced many times, are reflected in the approach of the new government. When you look at the assessment of these 100 days activity of the new government, these issues are centrally put in the assessment of the work. What are the issues? For instance, the fight against corruption. We are very heartened by the fact that some new legislative steps were taken, including new law on the illicit enrichment, including the reinforcement of the procedures for reporting asset and income by public officials, and also other related measures. Another issue, independence of judiciary. One of our priorities here in working in Armenia, because the European Union has invested more than 50 million in the judiciary, and we are interested in having the public perception in Armenia appreciating the independent work and autonomous work of the courts. And we are very glad that the new government has put the independence of judiciary as one of the priorities, clearly recognizing that there is a gap.
Do you see eagerness from their side? Because not everyone, not every politics, and not even experts are kind of optimistic about this government.
We approach these declarations in good faith. And the very fact that these declarations are made, that these topics are part of the public discourse in Armenia, is already something very important. And of course, you may say that 100 days is not enough to judge the performance of any government in any country, because some of the measures, they need a long time in preparing and then in implementing. But we are very encouraged, we are very buoyed by the first declarations and the first steps. So we as the European Union, being the biggest donor, the biggest development partner in Armenia, we would like to continue on this basis in the months and in the years to come.
My last question about agreements, I want to ask you, is there a kind of carrot and stick element in that agreement?
It would be a big simplification to approach the agreement through this logic. I do not see any trace of this logic in the text of the agreement. The European Union would like to avoid, in particular, working with any assumption that there are any sticks somewhere hidden. But definitely, there are carrots. One of the elements of the neighborhood policy, new neighborhood policy, is that states in Eastern Partnership area, for instance, could expect more involvement of the European Union in terms of development cooperation if they pursue a reform agenda, if they move closer to the European standards of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. As you know, one of the new elements in the neighborhood policy of the European Union is the principle more for more. And some of the states, in particular in the region, like Georgia, have already benefited from this approach, which means that the European Union is ready to provide additional resources, additional funds, if it believes that the reform agenda, if the values, if the standards of Europe are being pursued by government of a country.
Okay, let's come to the elections. You mentioned many times that this year is going to have tremendous role for Armenia, for future of Armenia. Have you discussed with Armenian authorities upcoming elections? And if yes, then what was the main issue or topic?
The importance of elections for the future of Armenia is now recognized by everyone here. So statements confirming the importance of the issue can be heard from different corners of Armenia, from the government corners, but also from the opposition corners. We as the European Union have been conducting a very constructive dialogue with the government, but also with other sectors of the society concerning the upcoming elections. As you know, the European Union has committed a big sum of money, up to 7 million euros, to help Armenia conduct elections on a new level with new assurances which would build trust and confidence.
You have already provided that funding, yes?
This
or
is
in process.
This is a process. I don't want now to go into details of this process. What the Armenian public should know is that the European Union, together with United States, Germany and the United Kingdom, have provided the funds to finance the technical arrangements stemming from the deal between the government coalition and some opposition parties supported by the civil society. Some of this money has been already allocated to the United Nations Development Program, which is the implementing agency, procuring the equipment and installing and preparing the other arrangements. Some of it will come later, but in due time. Everything is progressing very well. I wanted to express my appreciation of the very cooperative attitude on the part, in particular, of the government structures in Armenia. We work together, the donors, the UNDP as the implementing agency, as well as the government, the Central Electoral Commission, and the Parliamentary Commission supervising the preparations of elections. We have had numerous contacts. We have a regular framework where we meet and we discuss the implementation of these arrangements. And so far, I can say that despite the big challenges, because providing these funds within a very short period of time is a big challenge for the European Union. It is a big challenge for the UNDP as the implementing agency and for the government and the Central Electoral Commission. So far, we are very satisfied.
What do you expect from this election?
Now we talk about the general political framework. The expectations are very simple. These elections, we hope, will restore trust in the fairness of the procedure, in the fairness of the process. These elections will restore the belief among ordinary Armenians that the outcome of the elections reflect the popular will, the mood, the preferences of the population. So these elections, in the first place, are about confidence building, about the restoration of trust. The second element is, of course, that these elections are something so crucial for the implementation of reforms in the country. Because, as I said, fair elections are the only source of legitimate government. If elections are fair, if the outcome is seen to be reflecting the true preferences of the population, then the government formed after the elections has a strong popular mandate to move the country forward, to implement the necessary reforms, and to build a better future for Armenia. The third important aspect is, of course, the constitutional aspect, that these elections will be the decisive point in implementing the constitutional reforms in Armenia. Because the importance of these elections are that they will mark the transfer towards the parliamentary system of governance, and therefore this constitutional dimension of the new elections is also very important. So from the point of view of the European Union and I think other external partners, these elections will play a huge role in building the good image of Armenia. If the elections are conducted, as we are all preparing for, in a fair, transparent and just way, then it will boost the image of Armenia as being a country based strongly on the European values, as country legitimately belonging to the European family of democracies. It would also help us to think in terms of providing new elements in our development cooperation.
So if the elections won't meet your expectations and won't be fair, it will affect on relations of Armenia and EU and maybe also on agreement?
I don't want to engage now into negative scenario debate. For the European Union, it is important to think in positive terms. What I said is clear. The European Union has invested a lot in terms of financial assistance, but also in terms of political engagement to ensure the best quality that you can imagine for these elections. And therefore, we are interested in the success. We cannot now base our philosophy, our approaches on negative scenarios, because like many stakeholders in Armenia, in the government, in the opposition, in the civil society, we are interested in the success of these elections. We do everything within, of course, our limits to make these elections a success, and we base our scenarios on this positive outcome, positive logic. Therefore, let's avoid now these negative types of considerations.
So you said only EU provided 7 million euros for these elections, only the election, this process, yes?
Yes, the assistance of the European Union amounts up to 7 million. Mm-hmm. Together with Germany and the United Kingdom, this accounts for 90% of all external contribution to the preparation of the elections.
And as you know, the local elections was held on October, and that was kind of practicing of new electoral code, and especially in the third city of Armenia, Vanadzor, the results were not so happy for opposition and also for many citizens. And now the oppositional parties are boycotting that sessions, and they demand new elections. How you will evaluate the elections of Vanadzor and other cities of Armenia, which was held in October?
I think that without going into detail, in particular of the political elements of the outcome of the elections, because that's something which is so internal to Armenia that I don't think that any external observer would engage into the discussions. But I think that when you look at the local elections, you can see that there are elements which should be taken into account while planning for good elections at the national level. The preparations where the European Union is engaged are focusing on technical aspects, like the voter identification technology, video cameras and other related technical means, which will help to build the necessary trust in the fairness of the process. But there are also other elements of the process which should be taken into account. For instance, the use of or misuse of administrative resources. I think that one of the elements which should be taken into account and paid due attention now in the run-up to the elections is exactly this factor, to prevent the misuse of administrative resources. The new Armenian electoral code contains a number of very important provisions preventing the abuse of administrative resources. They were included to reflect the recommendations made earlier by the OSCE and the Council of Europe, and they are good provisions. They, for instance, prohibit the use of state buildings to conduct electoral campaigns. They prohibit the public officials who are running for the National Assembly to continue performing their normal duties as public officials, and so on and so forth. This is an aspect which is very important in the case of Armenia, because in the past, not only the opposition parties, but also the Council of Europe and ODIHR observers pointed out in their reports. So I would like to draw the attention to the fact that last year the Council of Europe, Venice Commission and the ODIHR adopted joint guidelines preventing the abuse of administrative resources, which I believe should be very seriously taken into account by all electoral institutions, starting from the Central Electoral Commission, but also by other stakeholders. I think that this aspect is very important, and elections, local elections in Varnazor and Gyumri showed that some progress can be done also in Armenia. As I said, the legislation, including the new electoral code, are up to the European standards, but there is the question of implementation. And here comes the very important role not only of the Central Electoral Commission, but also the law enforcement agencies, including investigation commission, to react properly to cases which would violate the legislation of Armenia, the new electoral code, and which would unnecessarily tarnish the image of Armenia through such developments. Another issue which again should be, I think, paid due attention is the question of electoral corruption. And again, when you look at the legislation, the new electoral code, there is a clear prohibition of providing any promise, directly or indirectly, of financial gain or any promise of providing services, even food or whatever, for the sake of, say, electoral favors. And again, since in the past in Armenia so many people were complaining about this, I would assume that to make the new elections looking qualitatively better than the elections from the past, again, this aspect should be taken into account. Because both of these issues, the misuse of administrative resources and the electoral corruption, are, I would call, stupid things which would tarnish the image of good elections. And for us, for the European Union, as I said, we are sincerely interested in really good elections in Armenia. When I said good elections, I don't mean perfect elections, because as we know from many countries, including well-established democracies, you can never have perfect elections. And there will be always people who will be complaining, in particular the losers. That's the nature of things. They will always try to point out, oh, this was not good, this was not fair.
And we saw that even in US.
Everywhere. You know, Armenia is no different. We cannot have high expectations concerning Armenia than we have to other countries. That would be not fair to Armenia. And I would be the first to complain about it. When we say good elections, we should be prepared that there will be irregularities here and there. that there will be people who will be complaining about it. But when you have a transparent framework, when you have due attention paid to all these complaints and signals, in particular by the electoral administration, but also by law enforcement, then you can mitigate the negative fallout. Then you can deal with complaints, you can deal with criticism, and I think that these new elections will be a big improvement in this respect.
You mentioned electoral code as a good one, but OSCE ODIHR recently had published a report about upcoming elections and also electoral codes, and they addresses concerns about the effective, including like implementations of new electoral codes. So they say they arise question of difficulties of electoral system, and do you agree with this point that difficulties can make chaos on the electoral date, and also will like make fear for some kind of violations?
Let me clarify. I didn't pass any judgment on the electoral code, calling it good or bad. We as the European Union, we rely very much on the assessment given by the Venice Commission and the ODIHR concerning the electoral code. I can tell you I have had numerous conversations with the authorities concerning the improvements in the electoral code, because the European Union fully supports the views of the ODIHR and the Venice Commission that there are elements in the code which could be changed, could be improved. And they relate to different aspects. I can tell you that in our discussions, because the European Union takes the floor at the Venice Commission, the European Union also is asked by ODIHR about its views. We discuss also with the Armenian authorities the issues related to the work of the observers, which is very important. And it's not a secret that through our dialogue, the Armenian authorities have abandoned some of the initial provisions from the code, like for instance the requirement to take a test, to pass an exam for an observer. I think here we have had very constructive dialogue on the basis of ODIHR and Venice Commission recommendations, and the Armenian partners decided that ODIHR and Venice Commissions were right. So this requirement was dropped, but there are some other elements where, for instance, the civil society in Armenia is not happy about, including the limitation of the people in the polling stations, observers in the polling stations, including limitations on the presence of journalists, and so on and so forth. We have had very friendly dialogue with our Armenian partners on these issues. Sometimes it's a question of interpretation. Sometimes different agents, including civil society, have different interpretation of how these provisions can be applied, and the authorities have a different interpretation. There are elements definitely in the electoral code which are still seen as controversial, not only by ODIHR and the Venice Commission, as you know, but also, and in the first place, by the civil society. Now, you referred to the recent activities of ODIHR preparing the observation of the next elections, and this needs assessment report has been prepared, and we are very glad that ODIHR is preparing to deploy a big mission. We hope that the Armenian authorities will soon extend the formal invitation. But I think what is good for Armenia is that the OSCE is bracing for a full-fledged observation effort. which would give additional legitimacy to the opinions and the assessment of the elections.
The mechanism of registration by 10 fingerprints wasn't included in new electoral codes. Do you think that it will have any effect on legitimacy of the process, not including this mechanism?
We have a voter identification procedure. You referred to the initial deal which was negotiated in May and June. We have now a new option. The new option refers to the voter identification process on the election day. As I said, the UNDP is now preparing all the necessary procedures for deploying the machinery. The Central Electoral Commission and UNDP will be preparing, will be training people who will be operating these machines. This is not the first time in the world where such machinery will be employed. So we have already some experience, and also in some other countries in the post-Soviet space, in particular in Kyrgyzstan, where a similar arrangement was put in place. I think that this machinery, this technology, is not the end in itself. Under normal conditions, would not be applied. But what we can say on the basis of experience of other countries, if employed properly, it can help to restore the trust. It has a very direct impact in terms of preventing, in particular, multiple voting. It has a very direct impact in preventing proxy voting. And these were in the past some of the elements which were topic of a very heated debate in Armenia. Because when you look in the past, many opposition leaders and civil society activists, they were saying that multiple voting is a problem in Armenia, that multiple voting is distorting the outcome. So if we have now technology which would essentially prevent multiple voting and proxy voting, that would be already something. And if it works properly, of course, we will still have to test it in practice, and in February there will be a trial running of this machinery. But if everything is put in place, if everything is run well, then I think it will be a progress. I think that many voters in Armenia will look at the process with much confidence than before. There are some other elements of these technological arrangements which we hope very much would help to address some of the problems, some of the complaints which were voiced in the past.
Mr. Ambassador, and at the end of our talk, what you will address to Armenian citizens before the elections? Anything to say to them?
Well, these are elections about Armenia, and Armenians should understand the role of these elections for the future of the country. So what I would ask Armenians is to be active, to go to the polls, to cast their vote, in terms of sincere choice, to resist any pressure, to make their own sovereign choice, and to believe that this choice is very important for Armenia. So go to the polls, because democracy is about voting. If you do not go to the polls, if you do not cast your vote, you lose essentially your voice in terms of talking about the future of your country. And I hope very much that, as declared by the authorities, these elections will make a turning point, that these elections will mark better standards, that these elections will bring back the confidence of the voters, and that these elections will be the launchpad of deep and good reforms in Armenia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.